Turkey's downing of a Russian Su-24 bomber near the Syrian border looks like a planned provocation. That is what the Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov has said. Does that change the way Russia will handle the war on Syria? And will it bring a reaction from Russia? In this edition of the debate, we'll discuss what Russia plans to do about NATO member Turkey and the way it will proceed in its fight against the Daesh terrorists.
This is the Russian military plane downed by Turkish F-16 fighter jets on the Syrian border. The incident has sparked a war of words between Russia and Turkey. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov has accused Ankara of pre-planning the incident.
We have plenty of information that confirms that this was a deliberate, pre-planned act. Some of our partners who contacted us yesterday told us that this was an evident setup, that they had been looking for an excuse, they had been waiting for an opportunity to do something like that.
Turkey has hit back and said it's only defended its own security.
Nobody should expect us to remain silent when our border security is constantly breached, our legal rights and our rights of independence are undermined. We have no intention of escalating this incident. We are only defending our own security and rights of our brothers.
Meanwhile, Russia is flexing its military muscles by deploying S-400 air defense system to Syria. It's been nearly 2 months since Moscow started its airstrikes in Syria. The aerial campaign has helped the Syrian army and its allied forces gain ground against terrorist groups in Syria, and that has angered Ankara and its allies in NATO.
So you cannot rule out the possibility that people in both Washington and in Ankara came together to try and scupper any possibility that Russia and America could work together to destroy ISIS.
It's now an open secret that Turkey has allowed its territory to be used by terrorist groups. It has also facilitated the transfer and sale of Syrian oil in the black market. Many believe the action has been in response to Russia's targeting of oil tankers used by terrorists in border areas.
It confirms once again Turkey's role directly in support of ISIS, which President Putin at the G20 meeting in Turkey very clearly with photos showed the 1,000 oil tankers that stretch across Syria directly into Turkey.
The recent incident has once again stoked tensions between Russia and the West. The two are at odds over a number of issues, including a solution to the Syria crisis. The incident has already affected the ties between the two countries after Moscow urged Russians to avoid traveling to Turkey, which is a major blow to Ankara's multi-billion revenue coming from Russian tourists. Moscow's fight against Daesh in Syria, however, seems to be unaffected, as Russia says downing of its jet won't deflect it from its anti-militant mission in Syria.
Our guest joining us for this edition of the debate, author and historian Webster Griffin Tarpley, joins us from Washington, D.C. And we have columnist at The Hill, Brent Budowsky, who also joins us from Washington, D.C. Gentlemen, welcome. I'll start with you, Brent Budowsky. Maybe you can tell us when Turkey downed this Russian Su-24 bomber near the Syrian border, in which Russia has said it looks like a planned provocation, how Turkey reached the decision to do this. I'm sure it wasn't a bird in the sky they decided to shoot. They must have had some plans, some thinking there. What may have gone through their minds?
Well, a big part of the thinking would be that Vladimir Putin and Russia have been bombing not ISIS as much as rebels that are against ISIS. Vladimir Putin has not been honest. They've been bombing people that most of the West is supporting, and many of the people down there were supporting who were fighting ISIS. And I think the Turks got to the point that they couldn't take it anymore, and they were angry. And a lot of people in the West are angry at Russia right now for that bombing. A lot of people in NATO, a lot of people in the U.S., a lot of people in the region who are against Assad and against ISIS are angry. Now, they bombed the Turkoman rebels, and that's part of a pattern of Russia bombing people who were fighting ISIS. So President Putin has not been entirely honest. Now, 2 quick points I want to make, because this is important. Every nation that listens to this broadcast could be subject to a terror attack from ISIS. It's a very dangerous moment right now. Point number 1, Putin has to start fighting ISIS and not attacking the people, bombing the people who are also fighting ISIS, if he wants to be part of the world. It was not helpful if President Putin met the supreme leader the other day for the purpose of defending Assad. If the purpose of that meeting was to decide how Assad can be phased out or ultimately not be in power, it was positive. If the purpose of the meeting was to defend Assad, to protect Assad, that meeting was very unfortunate and damaging to all nations. One other quick point. We have to decide if we're all going to work together, and I think it's time the Iranian government release the American Washington Post reporters and others who are being held after phony trials in prison. That is wrong, and that is not something that the Iranian government should be doing. They should release those people now, today, immediately. And we need to all unite in the fight to kill and destroy ISIS. Those are the enemies, not everyone else.
Okay, it seems like you are looking at the meeting that was held between the Russian president and Iran's leader to be a bad thing, because you're stating it that it's in support.
Well, I don't know what the purpose
hold on,
was.
let me just finish, because you said to complete your sentence,
Sure.
or my sentence of what you said, in support of keeping Assad in power. But first of all, that wasn't the case, and furthermore, we don't know all the details of what they discussed. And thirdly, I don't know if I should ask Webster Griffin Tarpley this. As far as I recall, the U.S. and its U.S.-led coalition are not doing a great job getting rid of the Daesh terrorists, but rather Iran in the advisory military role and Russia have been more successful in killing these terrorists. Webster Griffin Tarpley.
Now, let me just say one thing to answer that really quickly. I did not say what the
Russian
purpose of the
effort
meeting
has been
was,
much
and I
more
don't know.
intensive.
Okay, Webster
if I
Griffin
may,
Tarpley,
Brent.
I'm sorry.
If the
Brent
purpose
Budowsky,
was
quickly,
to
so we can bring in
Senators for
Webster Griffin Tarpley
filibusters
in the
are down the
conversation.
street at the
Yeah,
Senate.
but
Budowsky,
the
quickly,
purpose
go
of
ahead.
the meeting between the Supreme Leader and Putin was to discuss how Assad could be phased out or removed and to how to destroy ISIS. It was good. If the purpose of the meeting was to defend and support Assad, who creates more terrorists than anybody in the world by his butchering in Damascus, then it was bad. I don't know what the purpose was, so I'm not drawing a conclusion, but I want to be very direct with our audience because this is important right now. We have to unite to destroy ISIS and kill them. That is in the Russian, Iranian, American, NATO, and Middle Eastern interest. That's what we need to do, period.
That's what Iran and Russia has said. Now, Webster Griffin Tarpley, go ahead.
Yes, thank you. The Washington Post of this morning, which I have in my pocket, says that the U.S. claims to have staged 8,500 combat sorties over a period of, by now, 15 months, whereas Russia, with a smaller group of assets, has been able to stage 4,000 sorties, so half as much, but in only about 6 or 7 weeks. I'm afraid what Mr. Budowsky is arguing is a kind of double talk. It says the principle that everybody needs to put as job one is to destroy ISIS, but at the same time, we've got to overthrow Assad. This is militarily absolutely ridiculous. This is absurd. The purpose of the Russian phase that we're in now, I would say, is to stabilize Assad. Without Assad, without the Syrian government, without the Syrian Arab army, the entire thing would descend into hopeless chaos, like Libya. Remember that those rebels, there are 300 groups, and they fight amongst themselves as much as they fight anybody else. We just had reports in the last couple of days that various of these rebel groups are fighting. The absolute precondition is to keep a Syrian government, and that has come to mean Assad. Now, this event, it obviously was pre-planned. It was a staged provocation. We have to remember that Turkey has a very expansive and indeed illegal approach to their borders. They say that they get to control 8 kilometers of airspace on the Syrian side in the air, and they get to control 15 kilometers on the ground on the Syrian side. So in effect, along a border of what, 500 kilometers or more, the Turkish government has carved out 500, 700 square kilometers that they say they control and not Syria. This is illegal. This is absurd. Now, the other thing about this area, it's a very sensitive area. It's the Hatay, I'd call it a peninsula. It looks like a parrot's beak on the map, right, pointing downward. It includes the ancient Christian city of Antioch, but the Turks have taken it, even though by treaty it was part of the French mandate and therefore should have remained with Syria and Lebanon at that time. That area right now is where ISIS and the other terrorists are getting routed. They're being defeated. They're being clobbered by a combination of the Syrian Arab Army, Hezbollah, and the Russian Air Force. That's an effective combination. They're about to cut the M4 highway. They're about to make it basically impossible for the terrorist rebels to operate in Latakia province. Those rebels are all terrorists. If you're a moderate oppositionist to Assad, you're in the parliament, and there are some. There is a legal opposition which is in the parliament. I know because I've talked to them over the years. But if you're out in the field with a Kalashnikov, you're a terrorist. And I'm sorry, that goes for these Turkmen too. So the idea was that Erdogan was getting heat from inside the Turkish political system, that he wasn't doing enough for the Turkmen. But in particular, I think the idea that this was done to sabotage a possible convergence of Russia with the United States, that's realistic. In Obama's press conference yesterday, he said there is a possible convergence with Russia over this. The precondition is, if it's supposed to be the anti-ISIS coalition, then everybody can join. If we have this other thing in our pocket that says now you've got to be against Assad, well, that will not fly because that is insanity. Nobody should want that. That would increase the refugee flow into Europe to, 1 million a month if we have the collapse of the Syrian state. So that has to be prevented at all costs.
Well, Brent Budowsky, why is it that the U.S. is not providing this list, along with other countries, this list of, whether you want to call it moderates or the list of terrorists, but the list of the groups that the countries are backing? Why are they reluctant to do that for Russia?
Well, they should do that for everybody. I agree with that.
But they're not doing it.
I don't support a policy that is bombing. Well, I agree that they should. They don't listen to me. I support 20,000 ground troops, special operations forces aimed to kill ISIS only, not Assad. And in the 20,000 special operations ground troops that I have proposed, what I want is 3,000 Americans only, and 10,000 or more from the Arab League countries who are Muslims, plus the rest from Europe and Australia. I think it is insane to do a policy that is bombing only without ground wars. And I emphasize, of the 20,000 ground troops that I have supported, I'm not talking about them attacking Assad. I'm talking about them attacking only ISIS. The problem with the Russian bombing is a lot of it is directed at people fighting ISIS. They're not doing it to destroy ISIS. They're doing it to defend Assad. Now, if Mr. Tarpley wants to defend a mass murderer in Damascus, that is his right. That's why they call this show a debate. I don't agree with that. And I don't think most people around the world agree with that. But what we need are ground troops aimed only at ISIS, 20,000 in number at least, to destroy and kill them, with the majority of those troops coming from Arab Muslim nations. That's what I'm for. I'm not for what I think Obama's too weak, if you want to know my honest opinion. I think what he said with Hollande was not strong enough. I think we need the 20,000 troops. And I emphasize for the third time, not to attack Assad, whatever I think of Assad, and the sooner he's out, the better, but to attack ISIS, and only to attack ISIS, with a majority of those troops from the Muslim state. Every person listening to this broadcast is in a country where they could be attacked by ISIS anytime, as I am, as you are. That's who I want to kill right now.
I'm not too sure I follow the fact that you have to say that anybody listening to this broadcast is going to get attacked. What is your angle there by saying that, Brent Budowsky?
ISIS is everywhere. They have supporters everywhere, and they want to attack in all of these different countries.
Well, okay, let me ask you this.
International Directorate for Murder.
Why are they not attacking Israel?
You'll have to ask them. They haven't told me. I don't know.
Okay.
But
Webster
in recent
Griffin
days,
Tarpley,
they've attacked Russia. They've
there's
attacked
an
Paris,
assessment out
they've
there.
attacked Lebanon. They threaten Washington. They threaten New York. They're going international with external terrorism, and that is a new strategy of ISIS that we need to combat, attack, destroy, and kill now. And I hope Russia would be part of that. I hope Iran and America and Europe would be part of that. I hope Sunnis and Shias and Kurds would be part of that.
Iran is part of that, and that's another thing. Webster Griffin Tarpley, the U.S., I know you have a response, but the U.S. turned Iran down, actually made the UN withdraw that invitation for the Geneva talks, if you recall. And of course, recently, the U.S. invited Iran. You know, that's 2 years later. Don't you think they're making a mistake again by not involving Russia and Iran as a union into their coalition?
Absolutely. You've got to bring all of the participants to the table, and that's fundamental. But I think the point is we have a factionalized government here in Washington. There is Obama, who at this point I think is actually interested in getting rid of ISIS. It's a terrible political problem for him. And working with Russia to do that and accepting Assad in the short run. But then we have the warmongers, right? We have the neocons. We have people like Ashton Carter, the head of the Pentagon, who I call a warmonger utopian pedant, a kind of Dr. Strangelove over there in the Pentagon. We've also got the General David Petraeus clique, and that's General David Petraeus and his sidekick, General John Allen, who was the main saboteur of the U.S. effort for all those months when he was ISIS czar in the State Department. He's the guy who imposed this policy of phony war and appeasement of terrorism. Now, I don't really think the 20,000 troops are needed. I think ISIS is much weaker than what people say. ISIS, Daesh, ISIL, Islamic State, whatever you want to call it. They could not survive without Turkish deliveries. In other words, the infrastructure, the rear echelon, the supply line for ISIS comes out of Turkey, and it comes through a very narrow gap. It's 100 kilometers, 60 miles. It's west of the Euphrates. It starts with Jarablus on the western side of the river there, and it goes over to this area of Efrin. So 100 kilometers. If you block that, ISIS will wither on the vine. ISIS is a paper tiger. ISIS is not even the JV. It's the intramural team. They're pathetic. They can be defeated, right? The U.S. and the Kurds attacked Sinjar 2 weeks ago, and the place fell within 24 hours after we'd had defeatists and pro-terrorist apologists telling us that it would take 20 years or 10 years to defeat ISIS. All you need to do is interdict that. But of course, if you interdict, if you block that supply line, if you cut those lines, the person that's going to come after you then is Erdogan, because Erdogan is simply the kingpin of ISIS. He's the boss. Some people would say the true secret caliph of this entire thing is Erdogan, with his son running those oil trucks, right? We heard about the oil trucks before. His son is the biggest oil smuggler. His daughter runs a hospital for wounded terrorists. So the Erdogan family business seems to be ISIS, Daesh, and terrorism along these lines.
Right.
So I don't know whether we need 20,000. You got to have some kind of a military approach, right? Amateurs talk tactics, professionals talk logistics. You want to talk logistics, I can show you where the ISIS supply line is. You cut that, ISIS is finished. The whole thing will collapse. Some people don't want that, right? Petraeus would say that he created it, and that it's a CIA secret army, and they want to keep it in being to use against Iran, against Chechnya, Dagestan, Kazakhstan, the whole Central Asian area. In other words, there are people here in Washington who think this is an asset, and they don't want to sacrifice it.
But Budowsky, Turkey is a U.S. ally, I would think. So why does U.S. participate in something like this, knowing what our guest there, Webster Griffin Tarpley, said to be true, if you agree with that?
Well, I don't. And I do want to defend Ashton Carter, the American Defense Secretary, who is a very good man. I don't remember the insults that Mr. Tarpley just said, but whatever they are, I disagree with them. We cannot win a war with bombing alone.
Utopian pedant.
I agree. That's just nonsense, but I don't have time on the show here to even waste on something like that. He's a good Secretary of Defense, and he wants to destroy and defeat ISIS, which I hope everyone that's listening, except ISIS, agrees with. We cannot win a war by bombing alone. I do agree that ISIS is not 10 feet tall. I think we can defeat them with some ground force of the kind that I said, not the Iraq war kind of ground force of 200 or 500,000. I opposed the Iraq war from the beginning, but something like 20,000. When you do bombing alone without ground forces, you end up killing more civilians. There are 5,000 years of military history that teach you don't win a war by bombing alone without troops on the ground. I don't think you need a large force. I think you could do it with 20,000, and I'll repeat for the 5th time, 10,000 at least should be from Muslim nations, not Americans. Only 3,000 Americans, and the rest Europeans. But we have to defeat ISIS, and it can only be done with a reasonable ground force of the kind I'm saying. I disagree with Obama when he's not willing to do that. I disagree with Mr. Tarpley when he says we don't have to do that. I don't want bombing alone. I don't want to have children in schools innocently bombed by mistake, because humans make errors and technology is not perfect, and that's how the world works. But we have to, all of us agree, to defeat, destroy, kill,
yeah, I got to
and
jump in and
eliminate
give Tarpley
ISIS.
a chance to
I hope that includes
to reply.
Russia and
Webster,
Iran.
Griffin, Tarpley, go ahead. Sorry, Brent Budowsky. Go ahead, Webster, Griffin, Tarpley. Go ahead.
The combination that works, we can see what it is. On one side, we have the Syrian Arab army with some assistance from Hezbollah, with the Russian military aviation. That works. That is gaining ground. We're going to see the collapse of the terrorist rebel position in Latakia province and in that critical area of northwest Syria, which is where this plane went down. It's a very sensitive area. They might have been preparing to bomb or even do reconnaissance. On the other side, we have a viable combination, which is the U.S. Air Force and the U.S. Navy with their planes and the Kurds. And this is more than enough. The Kurds tried to cross the Euphrates 2 or 3 weeks ago and start cutting that supply line, and the Turks began hitting them with artillery. So the Turks intervene as a rule in favor of the terrorists. This thing is so famous, so it's so well known what I'm talking about, that Kerry, our Secretary of State, went on CNN a couple of weeks ago and said to Fareed Zakaria, I guess, that the U.S. and Turkey were planning to work together to close that gap. And some people have even said there's some wonderful...
Thank you very much, and I do apologize for that. Author and historian Webster Griffin Tarpley there from Washington. And thank you, Brent Budowsky, columnist at The Hill, also from Washington. Thanks so much for tuning in to another edition of The Debate. From me, Kaveh and the entire team here in the capital, Tehran, goodbye.